So today, just before we get into it, I'm going to be covering what is referred to as the Slender Man Stabbing from Wisconsin in 2014. If you are familiar with this case, you already know that this deals with 12-year-old girls, a lot of mental health discussions and internet safety when it comes to children, but the attack of a young girl will be discussed. This has been a case that has been requested for as long as we've had the podcast, and I felt like this would be a good time to discuss it because they were peers at school, and I think that this is a case that can help open people's eyes to just how vulnerable children are on the internet when there is a lack of control about what they're looking at and what they're seeing. So we're going to get into that, but I wanted to make sure you guys had all of the trigger warnings. And I also want to let you guys know that yes, you can Google and find the girls' last names that are involved in this, but I am not going to be saying their last names. I'm only going to go by their first names just because they're 21 now, and I just don't want this to be something. We'll talk about it, but you'll see why in the end, and you can very easily Google it. I just can't have that on my conscience. So let's get into it. It's 2014 in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and three 12-year-old best friends, Morgan, Anissa, and Payton, were happily making plans to celebrate Morgan's 12th birthday in May. Payton and Morgan met and became very close friends in the 4th grade. Payton was described to be a very kind, empathetic little girl who was always willing to make new friends and find the best in everyone. Morgan was a very clever young girl who loved telling jokes. She had this huge imagination and was always very happy and high energy. Morgan and Payton shared this love for sci-fi, video games, and fantasy. They were absolutely inseparable and loved being together. So when it came time to move on to the 6th grade, the two best friends were so excited to take on middle school together. But this also meant that there would be new friends to make, which is very intimidating after being in school with virtually the same group of people for most of your life since kindergarten. Morgan met Anissa on the school bus because they lived in the same apartment complex. The two started hanging out a lot and becoming very close. So Morgan then introduced Anissa to her best friend, Payton. And I feel like most girls have experienced this at least once in their lifetime when a duo has to transition to a trio, and just how hard that is, especially how hard it is at this age to do. I mean, I'll never forget how intimidated I was, number one, to go to middle school, but also when you see all of your elementary school friends making new friends, it's like very intimidating because you want to be friends with those people, but you know, maybe they had known them from church or, you know, somewhere else. Right. That's just my experience, but it's very intimidating. And I always have said this, like, there are trio girl groups that are absolutely iconic and they make up for each other in different ways. It's either they work out perfectly because everyone balances each other out, and or it's like there was two people that were too close for the third one to actually be brought in, and maybe there's one person that's best friends with both of the friends, and that's kind of hard because you would never catch the other two best friends hanging out with each other without the third. So that's kind of like what the dynamic of most, I would say, trio girl groups are. They're hit or miss. And when you're in the 6th grade, yes, you probably did play with a group for most of the time that you were growing up and like in elementary school, but you always had that one best friend. And then when you're coming into middle school, that best friend's your only best friend. Right. And so it makes it even harder. Anissa wasn't really excited about meeting Payton. Anissa initially came off as pretty much a mean girl. Payton felt that this was simply just fueled by jealousy because of how close she and Morgan were. Payton really tried her best to keep the peace, make Anissa feel welcomed into their friendship, and not feed in to that mean girl energy that was coming from Anissa. At some point, though, a shift happened where Morgan and Payton no longer had the same friendship that they had prior to meeting Anissa. Morgan kind of took to Anissa a little bit more than she did Payton. Like I said, Anissa and Morgan lived in the same apartment complex, so they spent so much more time together than they did with Payton. But it was not the time that they were spending together that made Payton unsure about her closest friends. Instead, it was an interest that Anissa and Morgan shared that did not sit right with her, which was Slender Man. The two of them had become obsessed and tried to share this with Payton. They tried to explain what their obsession was and the whole story, all the stories of Slender Man, but she just couldn't get on board. Payton was worried about just how fixated Morgan and Anissa were becoming with Slender Man, and it scared her to the point that she was kind of debating with not only herself but with her parents, I don't know if I want to be friends with them anymore. And again, this is something that is so hard when you first experience it, and it always happens in middle school.
Always.
It's do I want to keep being this person's friend? Are we on the same page?
Or did we just veer off two totally separate, different paths?
Right. This is something so normal, but when you're young and you're in the 6th grade, you feel like if I break up with my friend, I'm not going to have anyone else.
Friendship breakups are way worse.
They're the worst, 100%. Even though Payton couldn't relate to Slender Man and Slender Man obsession that the other two had, she still wanted to have friends. So she tried her best to just kind of push past it and be normal with them without Slender Man. But no one could have prepared her for how much Morgan would change or obsessed she would become with him. She was willing to do anything for Slender Man, including sacrificing her own best friend. On May 30th, 2014, the three girls gathered together at Morgan's house to kick off the birthday celebrations. They went to the skating rink, they had some frozen yogurt, and then they returned to Morgan's house for a sleepover. Typically, the girls, like all 12-year-olds, would stay up all night long.
Right.
For a birthday sleepover.
Prank call a couple people, do
giggling,
makeup,
telling stories.
Yeah. Talking about who you like.
All the things. But this night was different. Morgan and Anissa were so tired, they said, and they wanted to go to bed because they wanted to get up early the next morning so they can enjoy most of the day together before everyone had to go home. So the girls go to bed. On the morning of May 31st, Payton, Morgan, and Anissa woke up earlier than usual for a sleepover and decided to go on a walk in the nearby park. And this was at the lead of the birthday girl, of course. Once they got to the park, they decided that it would be fun to play a game of hide and go seek in the dense woods that surrounded the edges of the park. So Anissa and Payton ran to hide while Morgan turned around, closed her eyes, and began counting. Anissa instructed Payton to lie down on the ground and cover herself up with sticks and leaves to try and camouflage herself. And she did as Anissa instructed, and Anissa helped her by covering her up too. But once Payton was down, she was now extremely vulnerable, and Anissa did the unthinkable. She held Payton down and called Morgan over, who quickly approached them, holding something in her hand that she had pulled out of her bag.
Oh my God.
It was a 5-inch long kitchen knife. Trigger warning, I'm going to give the details of the attack. You can skip forward if you need to. As Anissa held Payton down, Morgan began to rapidly stab her best friend since the 4th grade a total of 19 times in the torso, arms, and legs. Morgan and Anissa quickly jumped up and left Payton alone, severely injured and badly bleeding in the woods. Payton had deep wounds that punctured her diaphragm, her liver, her stomach, and 2 stab wounds that barely missed an artery to her heart by less than a millimeter. Somehow, Payton had survived the attack and mustered up the strength to pull herself out of the woods and to a nearby road, which is where a bicyclist came across her and immediately called 911. Payton told the first responders who had done this to her and what happened as she was being rushed to the hospital to receive life-saving treatment, and she survived.
Wow.
After 5 hours of searching for Morgan and Anissa, police located them near I-95 at a furniture store. The two had walked almost 5 miles away from the crime scene, still carrying the knife used to attack Payton in the bag that they brought it in. When asked where the two were headed, Morgan told police that they were on their way to the Nicollet National Forest, which was approximately 200 miles away, to, quote, meet Slender Man at his mansion, called Slender Mansion, end quote.
Oh my God.
The two were arrested and brought in for questioning. Through interviews with detectives, they learned that Morgan and Anissa had been planning this attack for over 5 months. Their original plan was to attack Payton during the sleepover, but they changed their mind so they could do it in the woods last minute. They claimed that the reason they had to do this to Payton was to appease Slender Man, who they believed to be 100% real. If they were to sacrifice Payton, they believed they would become his proxies. Morgan showed absolutely no signs of remorse for what she had done at all, whereas Anissa did, but only a bit after the fact. During the attack, Payton recalled Anissa saying to Morgan, "You do it. Go ballistic. Go crazy. Make sure she's down." Though Anissa felt remorse for attacking Payton, both girls were on the same page of them having to do this in order to appease Slender Man. So for that, they felt no remorse.
Unbelievable.
After spending 7 days hospitalized, Payton was cleared to go home. However, she still needed to receive treatment and therapy. But by the end of September of that year, less than 4 months after the attack, she returned back to school.
Wow.
Following the investigation, Morgan was charged with attempted first-degree homicide, and Anissa was charged with attempted second-degree homicide, both being waived out of the juvenile court to be tried as adults due to the horrific nature of this crime. Morgan's mother, Angie, explained that growing up, Morgan often experienced a variety of hallucinations, spanning from colors melting down walls, ghosts, and having two very active imaginary friends who she named Maggie and Seb. But the ghost that she saw most often was who she called It. It was what Morgan described as a man whose body was the color of smoke and ink. He would appear standing behind her in mirrors or shift around corners in the same manner that Slender Man is described to move. After Morgan's arrest, Angie reported that her daughter had become floridly psychotic. And I had to Google what this meant because I didn't really know. And so I'm going to explain it to you guys who don't know. It's a form of psychosis where the patient will experience disorganized speech and thinking, severe delusions, and hallucinations. They withdraw themselves socially and they lessen their hygiene and grooming, along with various other symptoms. Correctional officers also observed Morgan often speaking to herself, keeping ants as pets, pretending to be a cat, seeing and speaking with what she said were unicorns, Slender Man, Snape from Harry Potter, and various other fictional characters. After just over 2 months in the correctional facility, Morgan was moved to the Winnebago Mental Health Institute to determine if she was fit to stand trial. On October 22nd, 2014, she was diagnosed with early onset childhood schizophrenia and sent back to the original jail that she was placed, where they decided to continue on prepping her for trial and explaining law instead of providing Morgan with appropriate treatment and medication, meaning her schizophrenia was continually left untreated. For 19 months, Morgan remained in a state of severe psychosis, completely out of touch with reality. Finally, in December of 2015, she was sent back to the Mental Health Institute where she was diagnosed originally to receive treatment. There, she was given antipsychotics, and this allowed her to get enough rest that her brain could get enough rest to process and clear her mind enough to fully understand the scope of what she had done and how long it had been that she had been in a psychosis state. After which, she was finally able to express feelings of remorse, empathy, and sorrow.
It's fucking sad.
It's really sad. Unfortunately, though, 3 months later, Morgan was returned back to jail. Yes, they sent her with her medications, but she was still rapidly deteriorating mentally. As for Anissa, she explained that following her parents' divorce, she experienced this need to cling on to things and people. Examples being Morgan and Slender Man. She went on to explain that both she and Morgan feared that if they did not attack Payton and become Slender Man's proxies, Slender Man would kill their families in a matter of seconds. Furthermore, teachers noted that following her parents' divorce prior to the attack, Anissa began showing very clear signs of depression that led her to developing a, quote, delusional belief system, which only continued to be fueled with Morgan's friendship through Slender Man and the hallucinations that Morgan was experiencing and believed to also be real. It was said by Anissa's attorney that she was, quote, under the command and control of a delusional disorder, end quote. Though I have never been able to find any confirmation of a diagnosis, I do know that she was being treated in the same mental health facility as Morgan. In 2017, Anissa pled guilty to attempted second-degree homicide, which is a Class B felony since they were being tried as adults, and the jury found her not guilty by, quote, mental disease or defect. Anissa was 15 years old at the time and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, which she would serve at least 3 years in confinement and involuntary treatment at a state psychiatric institute, followed by communal supervision until the age of 37. That same year, Morgan also pled guilty, but was found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect based off of her schizophrenia diagnosis, which her father also suffers from. However, Morgan was given the maximum sentence of 40 years to life, with 3 years in confinement, involuntary treatment at a state psychiatric institute until complete resolution of symptoms or the age of 53, whichever is to come first. Also followed by communal supervision, periodic evaluations, or treatment. In 2020, Morgan appealed the court to be retried as a juvenile, petitioning the Supreme Court of Wisconsin to review the ruling, during which her attorney argued that she should have been charged with second-degree intentional homicide, not first-degree homicide. Also arguing that Morgan gave her statements to the investigators, which were used in court prior to being read her Miranda rights. Both were denied in 2021. On March 10th, 2021, 19-year-old Anissa submitted a letter to the court in a hearing saying that she regretted her actions and was deeply sorry for all the pain that she had caused not only to Payton and her family, but the community. After that hearing on July 1st, Anissa was released from the Mental Health Institute and moved back to jail. She was then assigned a State Department of Health Services case manager who would track her progress until the age of 37. On September 13th of that year, she was released from jail. However, she is required to not leave the county without permission and must wear 24-hour GPS monitoring devices. Her internet usage is fully monitored, and she is not allowed to use any form of social media or access the internet outside of her father's home, where she is required to live during her probation. Anissa is also required to take her prescribed medications and be personally escorted to receive counseling sessions with her caseworker. Following Anissa's release, Payton had to be moved out of the county. There, she had grown up, gone to college. She was in her second year, but she was transferred to another undisclosed college because of her being released.
That's pretty fucked up, actually. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's 100% fucked up. I do want to talk about this. Do I think that there are multiple layers to this? 100%. But the victim should not be forced to leave their home where they feel safe,
right,
and where they felt protected and where they have made progress from the time that the attack happened.
Right.
In fact,
the other Anissa should have had county limits, and you can't enter this county. You're arrested as soon as you enter.
And they should have made her and her father move to the outskirts of it, whatever, if that's what they needed to do, and she's not allowed in. Not having to remove Payton and her family. I think that's so fucked up, and I think it's such an oversight.
Yeah.
And that's probably the one thing in this case that I will definitively take a stand on in it. But I do want to say that in an interview with ABC's 2020, Payton later said that if she were to ever see Morgan again, she would probably thank her, because due to the attack, the medical treatment she had to receive, and how amazing her medical staff was, she now has aspirations of pursuing a career in medicine.
Oh.
Yeah. I think that's really sweet of her to say, because I would not have been mature enough to say that.
Right. That shows what a good person. I mean,
what an amazing person that she has.
That shows healing, which gives me a little bit of comfort.
A lot of work.
Finding, you know?
It does. Directly following the stabbing of Payton in May of 2014, the Waukesha School District immediately placed a district-wide block on Creepypasta Wiki. The members of the Creepypasta community then held a 24-hour live stream on YouTube from June 13th to the 14th, donating all proceeds to Payton and her family. Admins for the site also used this stream to show the community members that a creepypasta is simply a literary website and outlet, not to be taken as fact, making it clear that they do not condone or support murder, bodily harm, or satanic rituals, which is what Slender Man ritual would have been.
Right.
But I would like to personally end this segment by discussing the dangers of the internet. As adults, for the most part, we can see a creepypasta, we can hear a creepypasta, listen to ghost stories.
Hell, y'all believe half of them. I read.
No, right. And but there's still, no matter what cases we give to you guys, it's healthy to have skepticism in anything that you're hearing. I think adults can separate that much better than children.
Right.
And we understand the difference between lore and reality, or what a creepypasta is, instead of, taking it as fact. And I think that children need to be educated about that, especially when it's a child that does have access to the internet. And no matter what the social media platform, it's on YouTube, you can find creepypastas, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere.
Before we were on the internet, we were getting them in text threads.
Yes, in text threads all the time. And so
I wonder,
it is something that needs to be maybe addressed with your children.
Well, I also wonder if schools have implemented any sort of internet safety for like starting in like elementary school, reiterating in middle school, and reiterating in high school, because I didn't have any.
I didn't have anything like that. I bet
I'm
they have.
curious to know if they do implement some sort of internet safety class, or like a once a month or
like a thing that they have to do, or training,
right? But like a DARE program.
I do think, even if you think like, okay, this is nothing that my kid would ever come across, maybe just being like, hey, you know how mommy, daddy, aunt, uncle, whoever listens to podcasts, we listen to scary stories, like how do you go about being like, I think this is what the issue is with it. How do you go about with a child being like, this is lore, this is a real ghost encounter, this is not real, this is
a story, like kind of like Cinderella.
Yeah.
Those are called fairy tales.
Like a fairy tale.
The opposite of a fairy tale.
A nightmare.
Is a nightmare.
This is nightmare fuel. And we call them creepy. I mean, you could say it's called a creepypasta. A creepypasta, like give the terminology for it. A creepypasta is this. It's like a dark version of a fairy tale that you see.
But it's not real.
And they write them and they do very good, but it's a book. It's written.
It's like a story.
It's an internet story. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So I think that because
it's a scary movie.
Yeah, it is. And it's just like so hard to like.
It's like Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Put into terms. But like, who's most vulnerable in the situations like that?
Children.
Unfortunately, it's little girls like Morgan and Anissa and even Payton who have this interest in sci-fi and fantasy and being scared and playing around on the internet. Like, those are the little children that are at risk, and also like are
easily influenced
by it.
But it made them feel special. It made them feel a part of something,
right? And especially when you mix something as terrifying as Slender Man and the lore of Slender Man, creepypasta wiki, with Morgan who did not know that she was experiencing hallucinations.
Right.
Because if you don't know that's what it is, that's reality to you. And
so if that's her reality, then who's to say Slender Man isn't real? You know what I mean?
Right. So in her head,
it is.
She truly felt that both of them truly felt that this was something that was so real. And not that makes it right, because it absolutely fucking doesn't. It's just that there is a mental health aspect to this that really needs to be discussed. It needs to be implemented in schools to help children who...
For sure.
And so anyways, I just felt like this was a really good, important like conversation to have with kids that are going back to school. There is internet. It's at their fingertips, and it's
more accessible now than it ever has been. This is in 2012, right?
Yeah, this was in 2014.
This was 9 years ago.
Right.
The internet has progressed.
Right.
Like, I see horror stories all the time about like games, because Roblox has like different games in it. I think that's the right app I'm thinking of, the game. And there's like crazy stuff on some of those games. So like, while your kids are playing Roblox and they're probably only building little castles or whatever they're doing, like there are additive links in there that could take them to something totally different. And they're so susceptible that you just never know.
And it's not fair, and it sucks. And we as like a society should do a better job at protecting children who are at risk on the internet. It's just as wild if you lost your kid in a mall. Like, that is how vulnerable children are that have access to internet but don't have the maturity at the age, because they don't have the education or the life experience to understand that they are not safe, even though they're hidden behind a screen. I think it's something that's very important. And I think it fuels a lot of crimes that we see, children on children crimes, which I would love to see the research on that, about the internet and how it affected peer-on-peer crime, because it kind of makes you feel invincible. The internet does.
And especially with, I mean, you could pull in cyberbullying with this, and I mean, it's a blanket. It's a brick wall in front of your face that you do think you're invincible, because you think no one else can reach you from the other side of that.
No one can come kidnap you
or the iPad
through the computer
or the Switch or any of that.
No one can harm you through it. But then you have this mental health crisis with suicide rates being at an all-time high for young people, and it's because of the internet. It's simply put, that's what it is. You can say whatever you want to. Your brain is having to constantly flood this information and separate it between what's real, what means this to me. Like, how can you look at a screen all day fucking long? Now all of their work is on, they don't even fucking use paper, barely. My sisters have Chromebooks that are given to them at school. So it's just, they're constantly on a screen all day long. It's become like their bedroom, or how our bedroom doors, we'd shut the bedroom doors, that's our screen.